Julia Thompson was living what many would consider the American dream. At 28, she had founded a successful digital marketing company that was rapidly growing, competing with industry giants. Married for 3 years to Carlos Martinez, a charming real estate entrepreneur, her life seemed perfect. But everything changed in a single afternoon. Sitting at her desk, Julia was receiving the results of an important contract closed with a major multinational. The adrenaline of another victory made her vibrate with excitement when the sound of a notification from her phone broke the moment. An unexpected message. An anonymous message. "Do you know where your husband is now? Ask your sister Lindsay." Julia felt her stomach churn but tried to ignore the content, thinking it could be some kind of cruel prank. However, doubt gnawed at her. Unable to concentrate on her work, she left the office early and drove to the hotel where Carlos said he would have a meeting with investors. Upon arriving, her heart raced as she saw Lindsay's car in the parking lot. She had already suspected the unusual closeness between the two, but she forced herself to believe it was just friendship. "They are family. That's normal," she kept telling herself. But when she discreetly entered the hotel lobby and asked to check Carlos's room, everything crumbled. Carlos and Lindsay were together. Julia saw them embracing through the hotel room window, laughing and talking like lovers, with no hint of remorse. Her legs weakened, and she felt the ground disappear beneath her. The emotional impact was devastating. In that instant, she knew her life would never be the same. It was not just a personal betrayal, it was also a professional attempt to destroy her, as they were conspiring to take control of the company she had built with so much effort. Back in her car, Julia didn't know what to do. Her hands trembled, and tears streamed down her face. Everything she believed in was collapsing. Her own sister, blood of her blood, was involved. How was this possible? Not knowing where to go, Julia drove aimlessly through the streets of San Francisco until she stopped in front of the beach. The cold breeze seemed unable to ease the pain in her chest. She recalled all the moments she sacrificed her personal life for the success of the company, the projects Carlos and Lindsay closely followed, and now she realized it was all part of a plan. They wanted to take her empire. It was that night, alone in the darkness of her empty home, that Julia made the decision that would change her life. She would leave everything behind. Her name, her city, her past. Julia Thompson would die there, and a new person would be born. A woman ready to start over and fight back. Julia Thompson left San Francisco at dawn, her heart heavy and her mind in a storm. She knew she needed to distance herself from everything, Carlos, Lindsay, the company, and even from herself. Her closest friends asked what had happened, but she limited herself to saying that she needed some time away, without going into details. Deep down, Julia knew she could trust no one anymore. Everything she had built had turned to ashes. Her destination? New York. The city where anything was possible, where no one knew her name or her story. A city of opportunities, but also of fresh starts. Upon arriving, Julia settled into a small apartment in Brooklyn, very different from the mansions and luxury hotels she was used to. But that didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the anonymity, the chance to disappear and recreate a new version of herself. It was there that Julia died and Valentina was born. Valentina Lopez was the name Julia adopted. Simple, strong, and with an exotic touch that matched the new style she had chosen. The former businesswoman who spent her days in high-level meetings now wore simpler clothes, hid in local cafes, and spent hours browsing job platforms and startups. Determined to rebuild her life, she knew she would need to completely reinvent herself. Valentina started attending networking events where no one knew her, and she used this to her advantage. She participated in conferences about technology, digital marketing, and entrepreneurship. Her knowledge in marketing was vast, and she quickly landed a position in a promising small startup. The company, led by young visionaries, was exactly what she needed. There, Valentina could work without the shadows of her past and dedicate herself to the growth of something new, something that was hers, even if indirectly. The days were intense. Valentina dove headfirst into her new job, absorbing new trends, learning about artificial intelligence, automation, and market strategies she had never explored before. Her journey of knowledge felt endless, and she experienced a new kind of energy, a freedom she had never known as Julia. She was no longer a businesswoman with a legacy to defend, but a woman in search of redemption, willing to start from scratch. It was at one of these networking events that Valentina crossed paths with Marcus Ortiz, one of the city's most renowned investors. Marcus was a man of imposing presence, famous for transforming small startups into successful giants. Curiously, he seemed fascinated by Valentina's reserved and mysterious demeanor. It wasn't long before Marcus began to watch her more closely, and after a few casual conversations, he offered to be her mentor. Although hesitant, Valentina accepted, knowing that this relationship could be her bridge to something much greater. During one of their mentoring sessions, Marcus introduced her to other influential entrepreneurs and encouraged her to share her ideas. It was a significant test for Valentina, who, despite her experience, still struggled to shake off the trauma of her past. Each time someone praised her ideas, she wondered if Carlos and Lindsay were watching from afar, laughing at the woman they had brought down. But little by little, Valentina began to notice something peculiar. The more she met influential people, the more she heard rumors involving the names of Carlos and Lindsay. Nothing explicit, just subtle mentions of fraudulent business dealings, corporate betrayals, and even financial scandals buried by the media. Her blood boiled every time she heard their names, but she forced herself to maintain her composure. She knew that revenge couldn't be rushed. It needed to be planned. One ordinary afternoon, while reviewing performance reports for the startup, Valentina received an email that made her tremble. It was from an anonymous contact with documents attached. She hesitated before opening it, but her curiosity won out. Inside the files were a series of emails exchanged between Carlos, Lindsay, and other board members of her former company. Messages revealing how Carlos had embezzled funds, how he and Lindsay had planned to oust Julia from the company, manipulating contracts and shares. Everything was there, laid out in scandalous detail. Valentina's heart raced. This was not just confirmation of her suspicions. It was a weapon. A powerful weapon. With those documents in hand, Valentina knew she could take down Carlos and Lindsay, but it was still not the right moment. The pain of betrayal was great, but revenge needed to be bigger, precise. She began to plot her plan, to strategize each move with coldness and precision, something Julia would never have done. Valentina, now strong and determined, had a new mission: to expose the truth and destroy the traitors who had ruined her life. Everything was falling into place. The invitation to an international business conference came shortly after, and Valentina knew, the moment she received it, that it was her chance. Carlos and Lindsay would also be there. At that event, surrounded by market leaders and influencers, Valentina would see the perfect opportunity to deliver the final blow. Valentina felt the weight of destiny in her hands as she prepared for the International Business Conference. She knew that Carlos and Lindsay would be present, occupying the same spotlight that once belonged to Julia. However, Valentina was no longer the woman defeated by betrayal. Now, she held secrets that could destroy not only their reputations, but the entire corrupt empire they had built at her expense. The weeks leading up to the event were dedicated to studying every move they made. With the compromising documents in hand, Valentina discreetly hired a private investigator to dig deeper into the information. The results exceeded her expectations. Carlos and Lindsay were not just involved in a plot to steal her company. They were immersed in a web of corruption that went far beyond what Julia had imagined. Shell companies, money laundering, and million-dollar bribes to secure contracts with large corporations. They had built an empire of lies, sustained by a network of illegal transactions that, if exposed, would completely destroy them. Each new report she received from the investigator made Valentina's blood boil. How could she have been so blind? They not only betrayed her personally, but also shattered her business dreams, using her as a pawn to cover their crimes. But now, with this information in hand, Valentina had something far more powerful than revenge. She had the truth. Meetings with Marcus Ortiz, her mentor and now an important figure in her new journey, became increasingly strategic. Although Marcus was unaware of the intimate details of her past life, he sensed a change in Valentina's attitude. She was no longer just a focused entrepreneur. There was a spark of cold determination, almost relentless, in every step she took. And it impressed him. "You have something big planned, don't you?" Marcus asked casually during one of their mentoring sessions. Valentina looked at him with a calculated smile. "Let's just say I have a few aces up my sleeve. You'll see soon." He laughed, confident that whatever she was planning would be grand. Valentina was taking control of her life in a way that Julia could never have imagined. She was no longer a victim of betrayal. Now, she was the predator. However, for the plan to be perfect, Valentina needed to ensure that her enemies were in the right place at the right time. The business conference, which would gather some of the most influential names in the industry, would be the ideal stage to expose everything. She knew that Carlos and Lindsay had an active role in the event as invited speakers. They would be there to sell their success narrative with false smiles and carefully crafted stories. But Valentina would be there to bring down that theater, armed with irrefutable evidence of who they really were. In the weeks leading up to the event, Valentina organized everything with surgical precision. With the help of the investigator, she prepared detailed dossiers filled with documentary evidence, ready to be distributed to the press and key figures present at the conference. She knew the impact would be devastating. The strategy was ready, but one essential piece was missing: the public exposure. The night before the conference, Valentina received one last update from the investigator. He had uncovered something that could be the final piece in the puzzle: a secret bank account in a tax haven, where Carlos and Lindsay were hiding millions in embezzled funds. This discovery was more than Valentina had expected. If exposed, it wouldn't just be a business scandal, it would be a criminal case. Upon seeing the reports, Valentina knew there was no turning back. What she had in her hands was no longer just a matter of personal revenge. It was something that could lead them to prison, something that would destroy their careers forever. Those who had tried to ruin her life would face the full weight of their own crimes. Destiny had given Valentina all the tools to execute her revenge perfectly. As she organized her thoughts and strategies, Valentina recalled the last conversation she had with Carlos before everything fell apart. He had promised to be faithful, to be her partner in business and in life. "We are a team, Julia. I will never let you fall," he had said. Now, she smiled at those empty words. He had let her fall, yes, but contrary to what he imagined, she had risen, stronger than ever. The day of the conference arrived. Valentina dressed elegantly, but without the excesses that the old Julia used to flaunt. She was confident, with a firm posture. As soon as she entered the main hall, she noticed the curious glances of some attendees who recognized her from previous events, but no one had any idea who she really was now. For all intents and purposes, Valentina Lopez was a rising figure in the business world, with innovative ideas and an intriguing personality. And that was all she needed them to believe. On the main panel, Carlos and Lindsay were already in the spotlight. Valentina watched them from afar unnoticed. Dressed in impeccable suits, they sold their success stories, talking about the strategies they used to build one of the most promising companies in the market. Their voices echoed throughout the auditorium while the audience absorbed every word. They had no idea what was about to happen. Valentina smiled to herself. Everything was ready. The final blow was about to be struck, and when it was, there would be no turning back. Carlos and Lindsay were about to fall, and Valentina would ensure that they felt the weight of every mistake they had made. The auditorium was packed. Valentina watched everything from a distance, taking in every detail as Carlos and Lindsay delivered their speeches with smiles that now seemed even more false. They were surrounded by leaders of major corporations, influential entrepreneurs, and investors eager to hear their success stories. Valentina knew this would be the last stage they would shine on, at least while hiding behind a facade of lies. As they spoke, Valentina finalized the last touches of her strategy. Her plan was meticulously crafted, with every action timed for maximum impact. This would not just be personal revenge. She was going to publicly take them down in a way that no one could ignore or hide. And now, with the evidence of financial crimes that the investigator had uncovered, her strike would hit far more than their reputations. It could send them to prison. During the break between panels, Valentina walked toward the back of the auditorium, where she met journalist Mark Hill, an investigative reporter she had contacted weeks earlier. Mark was known for his incisive reporting and his fearlessness when confronting the powerful. He had been intrigued by the documents Valentina had sent him anonymously, and now he was present, waiting for the right moment to unleash the story that would shake the corporate world. "Is everything ready?" Mark asked, looking at Valentina with a mix of curiosity and anxiety. "Yes, everything is in place. The evidence is organized and ready to be released. You just need to hit the button at the right time," Valentina said, handing him a USB drive with the final files. Mark took the device and slipped it into his jacket pocket. "It's going to be a scandal. Are you sure you want this to go live while they're still on stage?" he asked, clearly impressed by Valentina's audacity. "Absolutely," she replied without hesitation. "It's not just about exposing them. I want them to see what's happening while they still think they're in control." Mark smiled, admiring Valentina's cold determination. She was unlike the sources he usually dealt with, people who wanted revenge discreetly or safely. Valentina wanted blood, and he knew this story would dominate the headlines for months. As he prepared to infiltrate the press room, Valentina turned her attention back to the stage. Carlos and Lindsay were laughing together, exchanging compliments and receiving applause from the audience, completely oblivious to what was about to happen. Valentina noticed how they looked at each other, almost celebrating the accomplishment of having brought down Julia, as if she could never rise again. But the truth was that Julia was there, right in front of them, with a new name, new strength, and the weapon that would destroy them. Before the panel resumed, Valentina stepped into a private room adjacent to the auditorium. She connected her laptop to the conference's data-sharing system and, with a click, began uploading the incriminating information to all devices synced to the event. Journalists, entrepreneurs, and even the speakers themselves had no idea that in just a few minutes, Carlos and Lindsay's darkest secrets would be flashing on the screens of their phones and laptops. The clock marked the start of the Q&A session. Carlos, confident, opened the microphone to the audience. The first entrepreneur stood up to praise their innovative strategies, asking how he envisioned the future of the company. Carlos replied with his usual confidence, selling his image as a visionary man. That's when everything began to crumble. Suddenly, murmurs started to ripple through the auditorium. Phones vibrated. Alerts popped up on laptop screens. People began reading the documents Valentina had released. Evidence of illegal transactions, compromising emails, details of fraudulent contracts, and millions in embezzlement started circulating rapidly among those present. Within minutes, the room, once filled with admiration, was now engulfed in an atmosphere of tension and confusion. Carlos, still unaware of what was happening, continued answering questions. But soon Lindsay, who was beside him, took out her phone and her eyes widened upon seeing the content that had arrived. Valentina watched from a distance as Lindsay's expression shifted from confident to terrified. She nudged Carlos discreetly, showing him the phone screen. Carlos paled. He could barely process what he was seeing. The conversations he believed were protected, The documents he thought would never be discovered were now in the hands of everyone in the auditorium. He tried to maintain his composure, but the confusion around him was growing. People were whispering, some were already looking directly at them with accusatory glances. The tension in the air was palpable. Valentina silently approached the stage, blending into the crowd. She saw Carlos and Lindsay exchanging desperate looks, as if searching for a way out, but there was nowhere left to run. They were cornered. With each passing second, more people read the documents and connected the dots. The room was about to explode. Mark Hill, strategically positioned in the press room, had already begun publishing articles in real time. Social media was flooded with hashtags exposing the scandal. Major news outlets started releasing the compromising information. Within minutes, the names of Carlos and Lindsay were on all the top news websites, and the first headlines were devastating. Corporate scandal. Entrepreneur Carlos Martinez accused of embezzlement and tax fraud. Explosive revelations expose executive conspiracy at business event. As Carlos desperately tried to regain control of the situation, a voice from the back of the room rose. Carlos Martinez, what do you have to say about the allegations of fraud and money laundering that just leaked? Shouted a reporter who had also received the documents. Carlos stammered, visibly shaken. Lindsay looked petrified beside him, unable to formulate any response. The entire auditorium was now focused on them, with phones in hand, recording every reaction. The mask of power and success they had maintained for so long was finally falling. Valentina, watching from a distance, felt a mix of satisfaction and relief. They were exactly where she wanted them, exposed, vulnerable, and with no escape. The plan was working perfectly. She had brought them down, and now all that was left was to watch the downfall unfold. But this was still not the end. There was one final blow that Valentina was ready to strike. Carlos Martinez was completely disoriented. His hands trembled as he held the microphone, and his once confident words now came out disconnected. Beside him, Lindsay tried to maintain a calm expression, but the terror in her eyes was visible to everyone in the auditorium. The accusations were no longer just rumors. They were facts laid bare for all to see, and, worse still, they were already being spread by international media. This is a lie. Carlos finally managed to shout, though his voice sounded weak, devoid of any authority. Someone is trying to sabotage us. No one seemed convinced. The murmur among the attendees grew, and the sound of cameras clicking and video recordings dominated the atmosphere. People wanted to capture the exact moment of the fall of two of the most prominent names in the market. Valentina, disguised among the crowd, felt a shiver of excitement as she watched the scene unfold as planned. Every detail had been thought out, and the impact of the exposure was happening before her eyes. Their downfall would not just be professional, it would be public, humiliating, and irreversible. When Carlos attempted to continue speaking, he was interrupted by a figure who entered the auditorium with quick, decisive steps. It was Mark Hill, the journalist Valentina had recruited to ensure that the evidence reached the press at just the right moment. He wasn't there just as a spectator. He had questions to ask, and this time, Carlos and Lindsay would have no way to escape. "Mr. Martinez," Mark began, his voice firm and projected for all to hear, "could you explain the origin of the illegal bank transactions revealed in the documents? There is clear evidence that you and your partner, Lindsay Thompson, embezzled millions from Julia Thompson's company. How do you respond to these accusations?" Julia's name echoed through the auditorium like a ghost returning from the past. All eyes turned to Carlos and Lindsay, who now looked even more dazed. Valentina watched from afar, smiling discreetly. They had forgotten her name, believing they had destroyed her. But now Julia was back, even if under a new identity. And she was winning. Carlos tried to respond, but his arguments were hollow. He stammered, unable to offer any plausible defense. Lindsay, for her part, was paralyzed, barely able to face the crowd that was now judging them mercilessly. The confidence they had flaunted for so long had completely evaporated. All that remained was a fragile facade crumbling before everyone. This is a setup, Carlos insisted, trying futilely to maintain control. These documents were forged. This is a personal attack, but it was too late. As Mark's questions intensified, a new wave of alerts began to pop up on the attendees' phones. This time, it was about federal investigations that had been initiated based on the allegations and leaked documents. The eyes of Carlos and Lindsay widened as they saw the first news about arrest warrants being issued against them for fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. The scene was chaotic. Reporters rushed to capture Carlos and Lindsay's reactions while conference attendees exchanged information and prepared to leave the auditorium. No one wanted to be associated with their downfall. Valentina knew her moment was coming. While everyone was distracted, she approached the stage, calm and confident, moving discreetly so that Carlos and Lindsay would not notice her yet. She wanted the final revelation to be personal, for them to see with their own eyes who was behind their ruin. Mr. Martinez, Mark Hill continued, according to the documents, you plan to take control of Julia Thompson's company through a series of illegal maneuvers and betrayals. Now that everything has come to light, how do you explain the way you treated the woman who trusted you? Julia's name made Carlos tremble again. He looked around, lost, unsure of how to respond. It was then that Valentina decided to act. She stepped onto the stage, unhurried, her footsteps echoing in the tense silence that had taken over the auditorium. Carlos didn't notice at first, but when he finally looked at her, his face changed. He recognized her. Julia, he whispered, unable to believe what he was seeing. Lindsay, beside him, widened her eyes and covered her mouth with her hand, shocked. Valentina smiled coldly, an expression that Julia Thompson would never have displayed. She was no longer the betrayed and broken woman they had left behind. She was someone stronger, more calculating, and now she held all the power. No, Carlos. Julia died the day you both betrayed me. Her voice was calm, but carried an unyielding firmness. But Valentina Lopez is very much alive, and she is the one who brought you down. Every move you made since then, every lie, every dirty scheme. I was watching. And now, everyone is seeing who you really are. Carlos tried to step closer, panic written on his face, but Valentina took a step back. You can't do this, he stammered, unsure of how to reverse the situation. Not like this. It's done, Carlos. You're finished. There's no longer a place for you in this world that you tried to steal from me, Valentina replied cuttingly. Lindsay, still in shock, couldn't utter a word. She knew everything was lost. At that moment, 2 federal agents entered the auditorium, accompanied by event security. They approached Carlos and Lindsay directly. The audience, once captivated by the presentations, was now witnessing the fall in real time. The agents moved toward the stage, and Carlos, with no more options, began to back away, his face filled with uncontrolled panic. Carlos Martinez, Lindsay Thompson, you are under arrest for financial fraud, money laundering, and corporate conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent. The federal agent began reciting as he cuffed them, shocking everyone present. Valentina watched in silence, her mission accomplished. She felt no need for more words. Carlos and Lindsay now belonged to the past, a past buried under the weight of their own betrayals. And so did Julia Thompson in a way. Now Valentina could move on. The agents escorted Carlos and Lindsay off the stage in handcuffs, while cameras captured every second of the humiliation. The entire room watched in silence, unsure how to react. The empire they built on lies had fallen, and the woman they betrayed was responsible for it all. When it was over, Valentina left the auditorium without looking back. The revenge had been executed to perfection. She had lost so much, but now she was free, with the future laid out before her. And this time, she would control every step of her journey, with no one to bring her down again. Valentina Lopez, a new woman, walked toward a life she had rebuilt herself. A life without the shadows of Carlos and Lindsay. A life she could finally call her own. If you liked this story, subscribe to the channel, leave a like and share the video, and see you in the next story.